This is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the week ending. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for staying tuned. A dozen of U.S. cities were thrown into panic protest during the week following the decision of the grand jury in Ferguson not to charge the white policeman who killed an unarmed black teenager on the street of Ferguson. Protesters held banner with violence on the first day of the protest in the city. Thousands of National Guard troops were mobilized to contain the violence that erupted following the grand jury's decision. Protests were held across several U.S. cities in solidarity with Ferguson's protest. U.S. President Barack Obama, in a national broadcast, charged the protesters to exercise caution and express their concerns without violence.
As all of you know, a few minutes ago, the grand jury deliberating the death of Michael Brown issued its decision. It's now come that either way was going to be subject of intense disagreement, not only in Ferguson, but across America. So I just want to say a few words suggesting how we might move forward. First and foremost, we are a nation built on the rule of law. And so we need to accept that this decision was the grand jury's to make. There are Americans who agree with it, and there are Americans who are deeply disappointed, even angry. It's an understandable reaction. But I join Michael's parents in asking anyone who protests this decision to do so peacefully. Let me repeat Michael's father's words. Hurting others or destroying property is not the answer. No matter what the grand jury decides, I do not want my son's death to be in vain. I want it to lead to incredible change, positive change, change that makes the St. Louis region better for everyone. Now, Michael Brown's parents have lost more than anyone. We should be honoring their wishes. I also appeal to the law enforcement officials in Ferguson and the region to show care and restraint in managing peaceful protests that may occur. Understand, our police officers put their lives on the line for us every single day. They've got a tough job to do to maintain public safety and hold accountable those who break the law. As they do their jobs in the coming days, they need to work with the community, not against the community, to distinguish the handful of people who may use the grand jury's decision as an excuse for violence, distinguish them from the vast majority who just want their voices heard around legitimate issues in terms of how communities and law enforcement interact. Finally, we need to recognize that the situation in Ferguson speaks to broader challenges that we still face as a nation. The fact is, in too many parts of this country, a deep distrust exists between law enforcement and communities of color. Some of this is the result of the legacy of racial discrimination in this country. And this is tragic because nobody needs good policing more than poor communities with higher crime rates. The good news is we know there are things we can do to help. And I've instructed Attorney General Holder to work with cities across the country to help build better relations between communities and law enforcement. That means working with law enforcement officials to make sure their ranks are representative of the communities they serve. We know that makes a difference. It means working to train officials so that law enforcement conducts itself in a way that is fair to everybody. It means enlisting the community actively on what should be everybody's goal, and that is to prevent crime. And there are good people on all sides of this debate, as well as in both Republican and Democratic parties, that are interested not only in lifting up best practices, because we know that there are communities who've been able to deal with this in an effective way, but also who are interested in working with this administration and local and state officials to start tackling much needed criminal justice reform. So Those should be the lessons that we draw from these tragic events. We need to recognize that this is not just an issue for Ferguson, this is an issue for America. We have made enormous progress in race relations over the course of the past several decades. I have witnessed that in my own life, and to deny that progress, I think, is to deny America's capacity for change. But what is also true is that there are still problems, and communities of color aren't just making these problems up. Separating that from this particular decision, there are issues in which the law too often feels as if it is being applied in a discriminatory fashion. I don't think that's the norm. I don't think that's true for the majority of communities or the vast majority of law enforcement officials, but these are real issues. And we have to lift them up and not deny them or try to tamp them down. What we need to do is to understand them and figure out how do we make more progress. And that can be done. That won't be done by throwing bottles. That won't be done by smashing car windows. That won't be done by using this as an excuse to vandalize property, and it certainly won't be done by hurting anybody. So to those in Ferguson, there are ways of channeling your concerns constructively, and there are ways of channeling your concerns destructively. Michael Brown's parents understand what it means to be constructive. The vast majority of peaceful protesters, they understand it as well. Those of you who are watching tonight understand that there's never an excuse for violence, particularly when there are a lot of people in goodwill out there who are willing to work on these issues. On the other hand, those who are only interested in focusing on the violence and just want the problem to go away need to recognize that we do have work to do here. And we shouldn't try to paper it over. Whenever we do that, the anger may momentarily subside, but over time it builds up, and America isn't everything that it could be. And I am confident that if we focus our attention on the problem and we look at what has happened in communities around the country effectively, then we can make progress not just in Ferguson, but in a lot of other cities and communities around the country. Okay?
Mr. President, will you go to Ferguson when things settle down there?
Well, let's take a look and see how things are going. Eric Holder's been there. We've had a whole team from the Justice Department there, and I think that they have done some very good work. As I said, the vast majority of the community has been working very hard to try to make sure that this becomes an opportunity for us to seize the moment and turn this into a positive situation. But I think that we have to make sure that we focus at least as much attention on all those positive activities that are taking place as we do on a handful of folks who end up using this as an excuse to misbehave or to break the law or to engage in violence. I think that it's going to be very important, and I think the media is going to have a responsibility as well to make sure that we focus on Michael Brown's parents and the clergy and the community leaders and the civil rights leaders and the activists and law enforcement officials who have been working very hard to try to find better solutions, long-term solutions to this issue. There is inevitably going to be some negative reaction, and it'll make for good TV. But what we want to do is to make sure that we're also focusing on those who can offer the kind of real progress that we know is possible. that the vast majority of people in Ferguson, the St. Louis region, in Missouri, and around the country are looking for. And I want to be partners with those folks, and we need to lift up that kind of constructive dialogue that's taking place.
Meanwhile, the white police officer, Darren Wilson, who shot dead the teenager, said that he had a clean conscience despite killing the unarmed teenager while speaking on the US TV.
I'd gone to open the door and get out of the car. And when I did so, as I was opening the door, I said, "Hey, come here for a minute." And that's when he turned and said, "What the are you going to do about it?" and slammed my door shut on me.
Slam the door shut?
Yes. I used my door to try and push him back and yell at him to get back. And again, he just pushed the door shut and just stares at me. And as I look back at him, all of a sudden, punches start flying.
He threw the first punch?
Yes. He threw the first one and hit me in the left side of my face.
Because, you know, some of the witnesses have said that they saw you trying to pull him into the car.
That would be against every training ever taught to any law enforcement officer. I don't know what or how many hit me after that. I just know there was a barrage of swinging and grabbing and pulling for about 10 seconds.
And then what?
I had reached out my window with my right hand to grab onto his forearm because I was going to try and move him back and get out of the car to where I'm no longer trapped. And when I felt it, I just felt the immense power that he had. I mean, the way I've described it is it was like a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan. That's just how big this man was.
Hulk Hogan?
He was very large, very powerful man.
You're a pretty big guy.
Yeah, I'm above average.
So you try to grab him, but you feel that force.
Yes. And then as I'm holding him, I see him coming back around with his left hand, and it's in the shape like this, and it comes in through the window and just a solid punch to the right side of my face.
So you're still sitting there figuring out, how do I get out of this?
Yes. I mean, the next thing was, how do I survive? Because I didn't know
How
if
do
I
you survive?
Yes, I didn't know if I'd be able to withstand another hit like that.
Where's your gun at that point?
I keep it on my right hip. Mm-hmm. I take it out and I come up, I point it at him. And when I said, "Get back or I'm going to shoot you." And then his response, immediately, he grabbed the top of my gun. And when he grabbed it, he said, "You're too much of a to shoot me." And while he's doing that, I can feel his hand trying to come over my hand and get inside the trigger guard and try and shoot me with my own gun. And that's when I pulled the trigger for the first time.
What happened?
Didn't go off. The gun was actually being jammed by his hand on top of the firearm. So I tried again, and again another click. And this time I'm like, this has to work, otherwise I'm going to be dead. He's going to get this gun away from me. Something's going to happen, and I'm going to be dead. So I pull a third time, and it finally goes off.
Now to London. London was also thrown into commotion during the week as protests were held across London in support of the black teenager that was killed in Ferguson. The protest in London was triggered following the protest in Ferguson against the decision of the grand jury not to prosecute the officer who killed the black teenager.
No peace! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! No justice! No peace! Stop the police! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Justice! No peace! Police! No justice! No peace! Police! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Bring it down! 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 Stop that squad! Get back! Get back! Come on! Stop the police!
And still in the UK, a suicide bomber during the week rammed into the British Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, killing members of staff. Last Thursday, a huge blast of the British Embassy occurred on a busy road and was heard across eastern parts of the city. A Briton who was a member of the security team was killed in the attack alongside other Afghan nationals. Several other people were also wounded. The attack on the British Embassy came just 3 days after 2 US soldiers were killed in a bomb attack on NATO forces also in the eastern Kabul. Both the British government and Afghan president have condemned the attack. The Taliban, who have been targeting foreigners, In their brutal campaigns, the country have claimed responsibility for the suicide bomb. Still on UK, British Food Standard Agency FSA has warned almost 3/4 of fresh chicken sold by British retailers were found to have traces of potentially fatal food poisoning bug. The Food Standard Agency said that British retailers were not doing enough to tackle the problem. The agency said that Campylobacter bug, which is the most common form of food poisoning in Britain, affects an estimated 280,000 people a year. The FSA criticized retailers, saying the food industry need to do more to reduce the amount of the food bugs in chicken sold for consumption. The FSA said its survey found Asda to be only major grocer to have a higher incidence of chicken contaminated by the food bug, and Tesco the only major grocer with below industry average incidence. Chicken remains one of the most eaten food dishes in Britain. From politics to economy, business, technology, the totality of what makes man is what we bring to you here on this bunch. We give you the information that you need, from business to economy, to politics, to technology. And that's what we do here on this bunch, from the beginning to the end. And that is why we are here. Keep watching this bunch from Ben Television. And today, I'll be your host. And with that story from the FSA, this is all we have for you on News Roundup this week. Thank you for being part of it. I'm Tunde Alabi. Do have a very good weekend of you. Bye.